What do you do when you really need a son but don't have any? Hi everyone, welcome to Tea with Amy. Today we're telling the story of Lady Huayang of the Kingdom of Qin during the Warring States period. We can see portrayals of Lady Huayang in popular C-dramas such as The Legend of Hao Lan and Qin Dynasty Epic, where she is usually framed as an antagonist figure. But was that really the case in Chinese history? Well, what we do know is that Lady Huayang would become the queen of Qin, but she was never able to have any sons. And if you were a royal consort or a noblewoman in ancient China, this was not just a personal problem, it was a political crisis. Your power, your security, your entire future inside the palace depended on producing an heir. No son meant no protection when your husband was gone. No son meant one of the other women's son would take power, and his birth mother would rise above you. No son meant you had already lost, just on a delay. So without any sons, what could Lady Huayang do? Well, she could adopt one. And that is exactly what she did. She would make the most consequential adoption in Chinese history, because in a strange twist of fate, her husband, the king, would die just 3 days into his reign. She was queen for only 3 days. And because of this adoption, she was safe. It would not only secure her own position within the Qin court, but would reshape the future of the kingdom, allowing for the eventual rise of Qin Shi Huang as the first emperor of China. Lady Huayang was born around 290 BCE, and her personal name is not recorded in historical records. Her lineage comes from the royal Mi family of the kingdom of Chu. She was the granddaughter of Miyue, who had defected from Chu to become one of the highest-ranking officials of the kingdom of Qin. And all of this was made possible through her great-aunt, the powerful Queen Dowager Shun. Queen Dowager Shun is remembered today as the first Queen Dowager of China, and effectively ruled the kingdom instead of her son, King Zhaoxiang, for over 40 years. Some of you may know her as Queen Dowager Miyue from the C-drama The Legend of Miyue. For hundreds of years, the kingdoms of Qin and Chu have had many generations of diplomatic marriages between the royal families. And over time, the Mi family members within Qin built a faction within the Qin court that was sympathetic to the kingdom of Chu. This was the Chu faction, and it reached its peak of power and influence during the rule of Queen Dowager Shun. Queen Dowager Shun truly believed in the principle and effect of these diplomatic marriages, arranging many more between the two kingdoms. She even convinced her son, King Zhaoxiang, to take a princess from Chu as his queen. This was the world that Lady Huayang was born into and grew up in. She was technically a member of the Chu royal family, but was born into one of the most powerful noble families and faction in the kingdom of Qin. The Mi name meant something here. Her grandfather, Miyue, held the title Lord of Huayang, and he was one of the powerful 4 nobles who effectively governed the Qin alongside Queen Dowager Shun. They were all, in a way, a part of the Chu faction. Growing up, this was simply the air she breathed. Ministers who bowed to her grandfather, courtiers who understood what the Mi family's name was worth. A palace that knew what it meant to cross them. And then, around 270 BCE, along with the tradition, her marriage was arranged with her cousin, Prince Yingzhu, the Lord of Anguo, the second son of King Zhaoxiang. It was a natural continuation of what the Mi family had always done in Qin. Stay close to the Qin royal family, stay relevant, stay powerful. For Lady Huayang, this was not just a marriage, it was an assignment. She was the next link in a chain that stretched back through her grandfather, through Queen Dowager Shun, through generations of Mi women, who understood that influence in this world had to be renewed in every generation, or it would disappear. But while this marriage was arranged for political reasons, Prince Yingzhu did love her. It was said that among the Lord of Anguo's consorts, there was one he deeply loved. He established her as his principal wife and gave her the title Lady Huayang. Huayang was the same title her grandfather Miyue had held as one of the most powerful men in Qin. She was not just a beloved wife, She was the next generation of Mi family influence in the Qin court. On the surface, she had everything she was supposed to have. But being loved was not enough. Prince Yingzhu had many other consorts besides Lady Huayang, and it was said that he had over 20 sons with his other consorts. 20 sons, each with a mother watching, waiting, calculating which alliances to build and which ministers to befriend. Every woman with a son was already playing the game. Whoever's son eventually inherited power would bring his birth mother up with him. Not Lady Huayang. The affection of a living husband was one kind of security. A son in a position of power was a completely different kind. And she had the first, but not the second, because Lady Huayang did not have any children of her own. At the time, Prince Yingzhu was not yet anywhere near the throne. He was the second son of King Zhaoxiang. And in a court where position meant everything, being second son was okay, but he was not going to be king. Prince Yingzhu had a title and a comfortable life, but it was his older brother, the Prince Dao, who was crown prince. But a few years after Lady Huayang's marriage to Prince Yingzhu, everything changed. In 267 BCE, Crown Prince Dao died unexpectedly in the kingdom of Wei. The exact reason for his death were never explained. Some accounts suggest that it was due to illness or accident. Other, more ominous stories suggest that he was assassinated. We don't know exactly what happened to Crown Prince Dao, but we do know what happens next. For decades, King Zhaoxiang had watched his own kingdom govern in his name, but not by his hand. He had been living under the thumb of his mother, the Queen Dowager Shen, for over 40 years. And the four nobles ran the court around her. He had been king in title, but everyone knew who was actually in charge. And he had finally had enough. Around 266 BCE, Queen Dowager Shen was stripped of her governing authority, and the four nobles lost their power. The powerful Chu faction that Lady Huayang had been born into began to fall apart around her. Then, the next year, in 265 BCE, King Zhaoxiang named Prince Yingzhu as the new crown prince. For Prince Yingzhu, it was the kind of luck that feels unreal. A secondary prince his entire life, and suddenly, through no effort of his own, the throne was in his future. And all of a sudden, Lady Huayang's lack of sons became a serious issue that could not be ignored. Because now, this threat to her position had a name attached to it. Among Prince Yingzhu's many sons, one had already begun to pull ahead. His name was Ying Zixi. By this point, Prince Ying Zixi was one of the elder sons of the crown prince. He had his own household staff, his own guard, and most importantly, his own little mini court of supporters who depended on him. At the center of that circle was a capable advisor named Shi Cang, a man who knew how Qin politics worked and how to turn favors into leverage. Like any ambitious prince, Prince Ying Zixi was building his future, gathering minor nobles and officials around him, strengthening ties with people in the army, and handing out promises of promotion when his time came. He had supporters, he had momentum, and everyone in the palace understood what that meant. If King Zhaoxiang died and Crown Prince Yingzhu became king without Lady Huayang having secured a designated heir of her own, Ying Zixi would be the natural frontrunner. His birth mother would almost certainly rise with him, taking the rank, the influence, and the security that should have belonged to Lady Huayang. Later that same year, her legendary great-aunt, Queen Dowager Shen, the woman who had held up the sky of the Chu faction for her entire life, passed away. And then, a few years later, her grandfather, Mi Rong, passed away while in exile. The powerful pillars that had held up the Chu faction had crumbled. The circle of power that had protected her and supported her was a shadow of what it had been. And the court Lady Huayang was navigating in these years was not a forgiving one. After reclaiming his power, King Zhaoxiang became paranoid, and the Qin court grew increasingly tense. In 257 BCE, King Zhaoxiang turned against his own greatest general, Bai Qi. Bai Qi was a legendary general who captured over 70 cities from the other kingdoms and was never recorded to have ever suffered a single defeat. It is said that his armies killed over 1 million enemies, earning him the title of Ren Tu, the human butcher. Bai Qi greatly weakened the military forces of all of the surrounding kingdoms and was said to have almost conquered the entire kingdom of Zhao on his own. But it was exactly this kind of military success that brought disaster in the face of paranoia and distrust. King Zhaoxiang was convinced that Bai Qi would eventually turn against him and decided to strip him of his command and send him into exile and forced him to take his own life. Some believed that this execution of Bai Qi was what set back the Qing unification of China by many years. But what it meant for Lady Huayang was something much more immediate. Nobody in the palace was truly safe. Lady Huayang was still beloved, and she kept her title. But favor and title had not saved Bai Qi, and it would not save her either, not without something more solid to stand on. What remained of the Chu faction was doing what they could to hold themselves together, and she really needed a son in order to secure what she had left. Into this moment, from somewhere across the warring states, a merchant arrived with a proposal. In the city of Handan, the capital of the kingdom of Zhao, there was a Qing prince that nobody was paying attention to. His name was Ying Yiren. He was a middle son of Crown Prince Ying Zhu, born to a low-ranking concubine, Lady Xia, who had never been favored. He had been sent to Zhao as a political hostage because nobody back home cared enough about him to keep him there. And since Qing had been attacking Zhao repeatedly, the Zhao court had no particular reason to treat him well. It was said that Ying Yiren was a lesser grandson of Qing and held as a hostage. His carriages and daily expenses were insufficient. He lived in hardship and was deeply unhappy. This was the man that Lü Buwei saw when he passed through Handan on a trading trip. Lü Buwei was a merchant from the kingdom of Wei. He understood value the way merchants do, not by what something looked like right now, but by what it could become. And something about this miserable, forgotten Qing prince made him stop and say, "This is a rare commodity that should be hoarded." It became one of the most famous lines in Chinese history, a merchant's phrase about sitting on undervalued inventory and waiting for the right moment, applied to a prince. Because he also saw something else. He saw that Ying Yiren was a brilliant young man and had the potential for greatness. He went to see Ying Yiren and persuaded him, saying, "I can make your household great." Ying Yiren laughed and said, "Then you should make your own household great first, and then you can come make my household great." Lü Buwei replied, "You don't understand. My household can only become great if yours does." Then Ying Yiren understood, and he drew Lü Buwei in to sit with him, and they spoke deeply. Lü Buwei had done the math. King Zhaoxiang of Qing was old. Ying Zhu had become crown prince, but his most beloved wife had no children. And that same childless woman was the only person with the standing to influence the naming of an heir. If someone could get to her with the right offer, Ying Yiren's worthless position could become the most valuable asset in the warring states. He gave Ying Yiren 500 gold pieces to build connections and improve his circumstances. He kept another 500 for a trip west to Qing, where he found his way to Lady Huayang through her own older sister and younger brother. We don't know the names of the sister and brother, but we do know that Lü Buwei used that connection to reach Lady Huayang, sending in rich gifts and a carefully crafted message. Ying Yiren regards the lady as heaven itself, weeping day and night in longing for the crown prince and for the lady. Anyone would be happy to hear such compliments, and Lady Huayang was no exception. But Lü Buwei knew that simply being pleased was not the same as a decision. So, the real argument was what came next. He passed another message to Lady Huayang, saying, I have heard it said, those who serve others with their beauty will find that once that beauty fades, so does their favor. Now you serve the crown prince. You are deeply loved. But you have no son. If you do not use this moment to quickly bind yourself to one among his sons, who is both worthy and filial, to raise him as your own and make him heir, then, while your husband lives, you will be honored. But once he has passed, the son of another will become king, and you will lose all power. This is what is called a single word that secures the advantage of 10,000 generations. These words resonated with Lady Huayang, as they captured exactly what she had been worried about. She was beloved, yes, but the true faction that she had relied on for most of her life had been greatly weakened. The court that had just watched Queen Dowager Shen's entire circle of influence get stripped of power was not a palace that would protect her on sentiment alone. She had to think about what came after the love. And her sister was now handing her a specific name, Ying Yiren. But why this name? Well, Ying Yiren's mother, Lady Xia, held no political power of her own, and would not threaten Lady Huayang even if her son came to power. Ying Yiren had no political support, no allies, and no attachments. If she supported Ying Yiren, he would owe her everything. Lady Huayang decided that her sister's message made sense. And then she made it happen. She watched her husband, Ying Zhu, until she found him in exactly the right mood, relaxed and unhurried. She brought up Ying Yiren first, as if sharing something she had heard. What a fine man he was, what grace he showed under pressure, how he'd carried himself in hardship, how he'd managed, even so far from home, to win people over and build a name for himself. She let that settle. She then broke into tears and said, I have been fortunate enough to fill a place in your inner palace, yet unfortunate to have no son of my own. It is my deepest wish that Yiren be established as your legitimate heir, so that I may have someone to depend on. Crown Prince Ying Zhu didn't just nod and let the idea pass. He agreed. He agreed so completely that he wanted to nail it into fate. Right there, the two of them took up a piece of jade and carved it together. It was a promise you could hold in your hand, a promise that said, from now on, this is our son, this is our heir. If nothing else, this was further proof of the love that Crown Prince Ying Zhu had for her. He had many sons already to choose from, but he went with the one that she had picked. Lü Buwei had suggested the one word, and Lady Huayang repeated to her husband and the Crown Prince, using her vulnerability to get what she wanted. This moment was the turning point of the future of China, and now she needed to meet that future, her new son. When Ying Yiren finally came home to Qin, he did not come as himself. On Lü Buwei's advice, he dressed in the clothing of Chu. Before he said a word, he had already said the most important thing. Lady Huayang was delighted by his appearance and moved by his understanding, saying, I am a person of Chu. She took him as her own son and changed his name to Zichu. He was telling Lady Huayang without saying it directly that he understood where his loyalty needed to lie. She was the last remaining standard bearer of the Chu faction in the Qin court, and she renamed him for herself after her homeland, Zichu, a son of Chu. The name was a message. She had looked at him and decided, this man will be my son, a son of Chu. And just like that, Ying Zichu was no longer a nobody. He was the official designated heir of the Crown Prince of Qin. His circumstances changed overnight. His name carried weight now, and the people who had ignored him began paying attention. and Lady Huayang's position was finally secure. She was the crown princess now, and she was going to be the next queen. The only thing left was to wait for King Zhaoxiang to die. And in 251 BCE, after 56 years on the throne, King Zhaoxiang passed away. It was the longest reign in warring states history. After a period of mourning, in 250 BCE, the ceremonies were performed, and Crown Prince Yingzhu ascended the throne as the new king of Qin. He will be known as King Xiaowen of Qin. Lady Huayang was made queen. After many years of insecurity, watching her family's faction get dismantled, and her worries of not having a son to secure her position, she was finally, formally, queen of the most powerful kingdom of the warring states. And her adopted son, Ying Zichu, became the new crown prince. But fate had a surprising way of expressing itself. Because just 3 days later, King Xiaowen passed away. He was 52 years old. Not young by any means, but also not that old to suddenly pass away. No official explanation was ever given for the reason of his death. Some suggest that it was simply from exhaustion. Some suggest that he was poisoned by Lü Buwei to ensure that Ying Zichu took the throne. Others suggest that the late King Xiaowen had pressed further against the remaining Chu faction, and with Queen Huayang's position finally secure, the Chu faction didn't need this king anymore. There is no proof of this, but there is also no proof against it. What is certain is that the sudden death of King Xiaowen was extraordinarily convenient for Crown Prince Ying Zichu, the Chu faction, and everyone else who had invested in him. And so, the man that Queen Huayang had chosen to be her son was made the new king, and he will be known as King Zhuangxiang of Qin. Queen Huayang had been queen for 3 days, and she was named Queen Dowager Huayang. King Zhuangxiang had fulfilled his side of their arrangement, and he did not forget his birth mother, Lady Xia, either. Lady Xia did not resent him for choosing to be adopted. Instead, she remained emotionally involved and even arranged a consort for him after his return to Qin. In return, he also honored her by naming her Queen Dowager Xia. But that was an honor in name only. The true power of the Queen Dowager was for Huayang. And Queen Dowager Huayang was now the most powerful woman in the kingdom of Qin. After becoming king, King Zhuangxiang named his primary wife, Lady Zhao, as his queen, and their young son, Ying Zhen, as the crown prince. Within the first year of his rule, he named his friend and investor Lü Buwei as chancellor, and Lü Buwei quickly took over day-to-day administration of the court in the king's name. Then, with Lü Buwei's support, Queen Dowager Huayang was finally able to restore power to the Chu faction. And with her adopted grandson Ying Zhen as the crown prince, the Chu faction now even has direct influence and control over the immediate line of succession. This was exactly the kind of situation that Queen Dowager Huayang wanted to create when she agreed to Lü Buwei's proposal. A court that was controlled by the Chu faction was the world she grew up in. It was a world that made her feel safe. Finally, she was home. But King Zhuangxiang's reign did not last long either. After being king for around 3 years, he passed away in 247 BCE. And just like the previous king, his cause of death is unknown. He was not that old either, only in his 30s or early 40s. In a span of a few years, the kingdom of Qin had lost 3 kings. The crown prince, the 13-year-old Ying Zhen, took the throne, and his mother, Queen Zhao, was elevated to Queen Dowager Zhao. But a 13-year-old king cannot govern alone, and so the real question was, who would actually rule? Considering formal rank and seniority, it was Queen Dowager Huayang who still held the real power. But the reality was more complicated than that. The Chu faction led by Queen Dowager Huayang was powerful again, but they were not the only faction. This was not the kingdom of Chu after all. This was Qin. And every other kingdom made their own efforts to get their voices in the Qin court. Each of these factions had one simple goal: to convince Qin to not attack their own homelands. According to later accounts, Queen Dowager Huayang needed to strengthen King Yingzhen's bond with the Chu faction and arranged a marriage for him with a girl from the Mi family. It was the same family tradition that she herself had been a part of, and these accounts claim that it was with this consort that King Yingzhen would have his eldest son, Crown Prince Ying Fusu. Unfortunately, historical records do not clearly describe who Ying Fusu's mother is. But a mother with connections to the kingdom of Chu does make sense, given Queen Dowager Huayang's own history and experience. At this time, there were two other factions that were strong enough to compete with the Chu faction. First, there was the Han faction, who centered around Queen Dowager Xia and her grandson, Prince Ying Chenjiao. Ying Chenjiao was another son of the late King Zhuangxiang, but was the son of a consort, not Queen Zhao. He was the younger half-brother of Ying Zhen and was a real contender for the throne if something were to happen to the new king. Then there was the Zhao faction, who gathered around Queen Dowager Zhao and Lü Buwei. While Lü Buwei originally lent his support to Queen Dowager Huayang and the Chu faction, he now found it more rewarding to side with Queen Dowager Zhao, especially with her power growing as the mother of the new king. Each of the factions were watching the others, each positioning for what came next. And this was the way of things at the Qin court, each faction pushing for the agenda of the kingdom that supported them. And all the young King Yingzhen could do was watch and wait. King Yingzhen was not the only one watching and waiting. Queen Dowager Huayang was watching too. She knew that she did not need to win against the other factions. The other factions were unstable and flimsy. She just needed to outlast them. Around 240 BCE, in order to strengthen and control his position with Queen Dowager Zhao, Lü Buwei introduced her to a beautiful young man named Lao Ai. Lao Ai disguised himself as a eunuch in order to stay within Queen Dowager Zhao's quarters, and they began an affair and had two sons together. In 240 BCE, Queen Dowager Xia passed away, and a Han faction lost its anchor. The following year, Prince Ying Chenjiao surrendered and defected to the kingdom of Zhao during a military campaign. It was a shocking move, because just a few years earlier, he had led a successful military attack that captured new territory for Qin, returning to Qin as a military hero. So why would he defect? Maybe he was pressured by the weakened Han faction at court. Maybe because there were rumors going around the court that Yingzhen was not actually a son of Ying, that he was a bastard child. And maybe the kingdom of Zhao promised to back him for a claim to the throne of Qin. Whatever the reason, it did not end well for him. Later that year, Qin armies took the city where he was stationed, and he was killed. With Queen Dowager Xia's passing and the death of Prince Ying Chenjiao, the power of the Han faction held in the Qin court was effectively over. Then in 238 BCE, the fake eunuch Lao Ai's affair with Queen Dowager Zhao was discovered, and with two sons, it was clear that he was not really a eunuch. This event brought great shame to the Qin court, and a great sense of betrayal to King Yingzhen. Lao Ai wanted to be his new father, and he even had two more new brothers. Lao Ai knew he would be charged with high treason and faced certain death. And instead of going down without a fight, he decided to use Queen Dowager Zhao's seal to mobilize soldiers and lead a coup against the court. But his forces were defeated, and he was captured and killed. And his family was exterminated. Queen Dowager Zhao was stripped of political power and confined to a secondary palace. Lü Buwei's involvement in the scandal was discovered, and he was removed from office and exiled the very next year, in 237 BCE. With Queen Dowager Zhao locked away and Lü Buwei gone, the Zhao faction's power was over, and now it was just the Chu faction remaining. As Queen Dowager Huayang had expected, she outlasted the other factions. Queen Dowager Huayang had never reached for the dramatic, visible kind of power that her great-aunt Queen Dowager Shun had wielded a generation before. She had never commanded armies or issued decrees in her own name. What she had always done was something quieter. She built conditions. She placed people. She made sure the right arrangements were in place long before anyone else realized arrangements were being made. She had been doing it since the day she carved a jade token with her husband in a room where no one else was watching. Queen Dowager Huayang was not going to start any drama or create any problems. She had one job, and that was to protect the Chu faction in the Qin court, just as her great-aunt had done, just as her ancestors had done. But with the other factions gone, King Yingzhen has started to reclaim his power. The Chu faction was still strong enough to hold him back, but not forever. He could wait a little longer. And a few years later, in 230 BCE, Queen Dowager Huayang passed away. She was around 66 years old, and her cause of death was not recorded. She was buried alongside her late husband, King Xiaowen. She had come into this court as the granddaughter of one of its most powerful men, a part of its most influential faction. She had watched that power crumble, and she had brought that power back. She had done everything she could. But the moment she was gone, he moved. King Yingzhen quickly dismantled what was left of the remaining Chu faction and took back full control of his court. He was abandoned as a child in the kingdom of Zhao, and even after returning to Qin, he was just a puppet. Chu kingdom this, Zhao kingdom that. Everyone at court wanted something on behalf of another kingdom. Who was there on behalf of Qin? Who was there on behalf of him? Even his own mother was involved in a plot to replace him. Well, all of that was over now. There was nobody left that could stop him. And in that same year, the kingdom of Han fell to Qin's armies. By 223 BCE, there was no such thing as a Chu faction left in the Qin court, and the kingdom of Chu was over. In 221 BCE, the final kingdom of Qi was conquered, and it was done. King Yingzhen had conquered all of China and unified them under one rule. Kings were weak. He would be an emperor. He would be Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. In the world that Queen Dowager Huayang lived in, a woman without sons had already lost, and she found the perfect way to address this problem. Many modern retellings of the origin of Qin Shi Huang like to credit Lü Buwei and Lady Zhao as the main reasons for why Qin Shi Huang was able to take the throne of Qin, and eventually all of China. However, a closer look at the people around him will reveal that Queen Dowager Huayang played an equally important role. Maybe the original proposal did not come from her, but it was very much her own desires and efforts that made it all possible. In the C-drama Qin Dynasty Epic, Queen Dowager Huayang is portrayed as an antagonist who raised a rebellion to try to overthrow Qin Shi Huang when he was still king of Qin. But there is nothing in any historical record that supports this narrative. According to historical records, Queen Dowager Huayang did not play the harem intrigue game. She did not reach for dramatic, visible power. She just enjoyed her life under the protection and luxury of the Chu faction, and she wanted to do everything she could to preserve that world for as long as she lived. Earlier I said she found the perfect way to address her challenge of not having a son. Well, in the end, maybe it was not so perfect, since ironically, the very arrangements she made to protect the Chu faction and her own position helped to create a Qin that would eventually erase not only the Chu faction at court, but the kingdom of Chu itself. Even though that was certainly not her original intent, the Qin that unified China was in a very specific way the Qin that she allowed to happen. What do you think about the story of Queen Dowager Huayang? Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed today's topic. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.